New York, in late November, had its way of cutting into the skin, as if every gust of wind carried 1,000 icy blades. Along the Hudson, the currents whipped with restless energy, rattling against the city's edges that never slowed, softened, or showed mercy. Towers of glass shimmered against the dimming light, a skyline dressed in steel, and diamonds dazzling, yet unforgiving. To most, this was just another evening, another day, swallowed by the relentless heartbeat of Manhattan. But to Natalia White, it felt like the city was pressing its weight against her chest, reminding her of how invisible she had become in a world built for men who strutted, claimed, and conquered. She walked briskly along the bustling sidewalks, her wool coat pulled tightly around her slender frame, her curls tucked beneath a beret that did little to block the bitter wind. Each step echoed her determination, yet her eyes betrayed a storm. A heaviness inside her, silent gnawing, mirrored the slate-gray sky above. By the time she entered the towering headquarters of Sterling & Comey, she had already braced herself. The building was a monument of power, its lobby gleaming with marble floors and golden chandeliers, as though mocking anyone who dared enter without the armor of wealth and prestige. Natalia didn't have that armor. She had diligence, discipline, and a quiet grace that often went unseen. She was a secretary, efficient, dependable, tireless. She scheduled meetings, drafted correspondence, and corrected reports that others couldn't be bothered to fix. And yet, to the world around her, she was almost invisible. The kind of woman people passed by in hallways, without pausing, a shadow that kept the gears of the company turning without recognition. On the surface, she carried herself with poise. Her posture was straight, her voice calm, and her deep brown skin was luminous under the office lights. She radiated a quiet strength. But beneath that polished calm lived a different reality. Sleepless nights, wounds left unhealed, a loneliness that gnawed with every passing day. And then there was him, Marcus Lee. His voice sliced through the office air before she even saw him. Sharp, mocking, pitched just loud enough for others to hear. "She still loves me. You know," Marcus drawled, leaning casually against a co-worker's desk, his designer suit impeccable, his smile dripping with arrogance. "Always chasing after me, always pretending she doesn't care." A ripple of laughter followed, soft chuckles from colleagues eager to align themselves with the so-called golden boy of Sterling & Co. Marcus thrived on attention and being adored. He was charming, charismatic, the kind of man who filled a room with easy bravado. And once, months ago, he had been hers. But now he was something else entirely, a scar that refused to fade. Natalia's fingers froze above her keyboard, her jaw clenched, throat tightening, but she kept her eyes fixed on the glowing screen. If she looked up and met his gaze, she would only feed his cruelty. She could already feel the heat of eyes around her, watching, waiting for a reaction, measuring her silence. Humiliation pressed in like a vice. She had endured this for weeks, his smirks and jabs, and needed to remind herself that he had moved on while she was left behind. She told herself she was strong enough to withstand it, that her silence was dignity. But today, something cracked. A voice deep inside whispered, "Enough." Her chair scraped against the floor as she pushed back, the sound louder than her pounding heartbeat. Marcus's laughter lingered in the air, but she didn't let herself waver. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't crumble. Not here, not in front of him. A thought struck her with lightning as she gathered her bag and straightened her coat. Tomorrow was the company's annual gala, a night when every employee was expected to arrive with a date, as if their worth extended beyond their work and appearance, a silent competition of power and image. She knew what Marcus would do. She could already picture him arriving with some polished woman on his arm, flashing that smug grin directly at her, parading his supposed victory. The humiliation would be complete. No, not this time. Natalia's hand trembled as she reached for her phone. She didn't know where the thought came from, desperation perhaps or pride, but she opened her browser and typed with more determination than she had felt in weeks. Companion for corporate event, discreet. Dozens of profiles appeared. Men with too perfect smiles, promises that sounded rehearsed, artificial charm that made her skin crawl. She scrolled ready to abandon the idea until one profile stopped her cold. Nicholas Brown. The photograph was striking. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that looked like it belonged in the upper echelons of Wall Street. But it wasn't the suit or cut of his jaw that caught her breath. It was his eyes, steel gray, unwavering, as though they could see straight through the screen, straight into her. His description was simple: companion for social events. Discreet. Adaptable. Fee $500. Natalia frowned. $500 was not a small sum for her. Rent bills, student loans, her budget was already stretched thin. And yet something about him was different. He didn't look like a man who rented himself out. He looked like he belonged at the head of a boardroom table, commanding attention, commanding respect. Her thumb hovered for a moment, just one fragile moment of hesitation. Then she hit send message. I need a date for a corporate gala tomorrow night. Fee confirmed. Can we discuss details today? The reply came swiftly within 2 minutes. Confirmed. 7:00 p.m. You choose the place. A shiver ran through her, sharp and alive. For the first time that day, Natalia felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: control. That night, as she lay in bed, the city lights flickering against her window, Natalia stared at the ceiling and wondered if she had lost her mind. Who was this man? What kind of woman risked her dignity and her safety on a stranger found in the corners of the internet? And yet what choice did she have to walk into that ballroom alone, endure Marcus's triumph, and be made invisible yet again? No. She refused. She would walk into that gala tomorrow with Nicholas Brown on her arm, and Marcus Lee would finally be the one silenced. Natalia closed her eyes, her heart racing with fear and defiance. She didn't know, couldn't possibly know that this single decision would unravel her life thread by thread and weave it into something she had never dared to imagine. Before we continue, put yourself in Natalia's shoes for a moment. Would you take the same risk? Would you pay $500 to silence a man who had humiliated you, to reclaim your dignity, even for one night? If this story resonates with you, if you feel the sting of humiliation and the fire of defiance in Natalia's choice, leave a like to let me know you're with her. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Would you have done the same? And don't forget to follow this channel, because what happens when Natalia meets Nicholas tomorrow at that little cafe in Soho will change everything. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. The cafe on the edge of Soho was tucked between a boutique bookstore and a florist, its windows glowing with amber light against the frost of evening. Natalia White had chosen it deliberately quiet enough to offer privacy, but not so hidden as to feel unsafe. The Riverwalk might have been romantic, but she wanted something steadier, warmer, more controlled. Tonight wasn't about romance. It was about survival. Inside, the air was laced with roasted coffee beans and cinnamon. Couples leaned close over small round tables, their conversations low and intimate. A few solitary readers lingered in corners, their faces bathed in lamplight. Natalia arrived at 6:58, her nerves strung as tight as a violin string. She wore a deep burgundy coat, elegant but understated, and beneath it, a black dress that skimmed her frame with quiet sophistication. She had chosen every detail, carefully determined not to look desperate, not to look like a woman who had bought herself an illusion. Yet, as she slipped into a chair near the window, she couldn't stop the restless flutter in her chest. Her phone buzzed in her hand. The screen lit up with a single message: "I'm here." And then he walked in. Nicholas Brown. The moment he entered, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't that the cafe hushed, or that people stopped to stare, though some did. It was subtler than that. The air seemed to bend toward him, as if drawn to an effortless and unyielding presence. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered beneath a tailored gray suit that spoke of precision rather than vanity. His hair was swept neatly back, revealing sharp features touched by the cool glow of the city lights outside. But his eyes caught her most steel gray, steady, scanning the cafe until they found her. "Miss White." His voice was low, resonant, carrying a calm that settled into her skin. Natalia rose, though her legs wavered slightly beneath her. "Mr. Brown." The handshake that followed was firm, warm, and commanding. His palm enveloped hers with quiet assurance, the touch neither lingering nor rushed. It was the grip of a man accustomed to certainty. He gestured toward the chair. "Shall we?" Natalia sat, her hands folding over the phone in her lap, as if it were a shield. "Let's get straight to the point," she said, sharper than she intended. Her voice was steady, but her heart thrummed. "Tomorrow night is the Sterling & Company gala. You will be my boyfriend for the evening. That's it. No improvisation. No surprises." His gaze remained fixed on hers, unreadable, but attentive. "Understood. We'll say we've been together for 2 months. We met here at this cafe. You're a consultant, you travel often. Simple. Believable. That's all anyone needs to know." He inclined his head slightly, as though committing each detail to memory. "Noted." She waited for him to add something and ask questions, but he remained silent, watching her with an intensity that was unsettled more than arrogance ever could. She cleared her throat. "Have you done this before?" His lips curved faintly, not into a full smile, but something close. "For $500. "Not exactly." The words landed heavier than she expected. Her breath caught, and she forgot the script she had rehearsed in her head for a moment. "Not everything," he added quietly, "is about money." Natalia looked away, staring at the twinkle of holiday lights in the cafe window. The remark lingered inside her chest, pressing against a place she didn't want to acknowledge. She told herself not to read into it, not to let him get inside her defenses. "Fine," she said briskly. "I'm Natalia White, marketing analyst at Sterling & Co. You're just Nicholas?" He interrupted, his tone calm, almost gentle. Her brows arched. "You're very mysterious. And you," he countered, his gaze unwavering, "are very direct." Their silence wasn't awkward. It was charged, alive, the kind of silence that seemed to hum with words left unspoken. Natalia shifted in her chair, uncomfortable with how his eyes seemed to see too much. For the next 40 minutes they built the scaffolding of their story. Where they met, how he had asked her out, the small details that would make their narrative believable. He listened with a focus that felt surgical, repeating each point back to her until she was sure he wouldn't forget. Yet the more they spoke, the more her unease grew. He wasn't playing a role the way she had expected. He wasn't embellishing, wasn't improvising. Instead, he seemed to absorb every detail with the precision of someone who had lived in a world where forgetting wasn't an option. When she corrected him once, "No, it was Millennium Park, not Central Park," he repeated the adjustment seamlessly, as though it had always been true. And when she mentioned her ex, Marcus, arrogant and manipulative, Nicholas's eyes narrowed, not with curiosity, but with calculation. "What should I know about him?" he asked. She hesitated. "He thrives on attention. He'll try to provoke me. Or you." Nicholas leaned back, his expression unreadable. Noted. It wasn't his efficiency that unsettled her. It was how he spoke, as though preparing for something larger than a charade. At last, as they rose to leave, He slipped a small white card into her hand. On it was nothing but a single phrase, red wine. "What's this?" she asked, frowning. "A code," he said calmly. "If anything gets out of hand tomorrow, say it 3 times. I'll handle the rest." Natalia stared at the card, the ink sharp against the pale background. "You're joking." "No," he replied. His gaze met hers steady and unflinching. "It's a reminder that you won't have to worry." Her throat tightened. She slipped the card into her purse, but the unease remained. What kind of man prepared safety codes for a rented evening? Outside, the city night was sharp, each gust of wind carrying fragments of frost. They paused at the corner, where their paths would diverge, her subway station to the right, his sleek black car waiting to the left. "Until tomorrow," Nicholas said, his voice threaded with finality. Natalia nodded. The words refused to form. As he turned and walked away, the crowd seemed to part around him, instinctively giving space to a man who carried himself above them all. She stood frozen for a moment, her breath clouding in the cold air, before finally descending into the subway. That night, sleep refused her. Natalia tossed beneath her sheets the echo of Nicholas's words, haunting her. Not everything is about money. Who was he to say something like that? What kind of man rented himself out, yet carried the bearing of someone used to commanding rooms full of executives? Each time she closed her eyes, she saw him again sitting across the cafe table, his expression calm, his gaze too sharp. She had expected arrogance, or at least a practiced charm. Instead, she had found something stranger, restraint, calculation, control. By dawn, her nerves had hardened into resolve. Tomorrow, Marcus would not win. She would walk into that ballroom tomorrow, with Nicholas Brown on her arm. For once, the humiliation would not be hers. And yet beneath the defiance, a question she couldn't shake pulsed like a warning drumbeat in her chest. Who exactly had she invited into her life? The Saturday sky over Manhattan was the color of steel, a heavy gray pressed down by clouds swollen with the promise of rain. The city was already awake, restless and loud, but Natalia White felt detached from its rhythm. She rose early, her body humming with nervous energy, her mind circling one relentless thought. Tonight would decide everything. The gala at Sterling & Co. was not just a party. It was a silent contest, a parade of appearances where reputations were whispered into shape and ambitions sharpened like knives. She had attended for years, always in the background, always overlooked. But this time would be different. This time she would not walk alone. Still beneath the determination, the memory of last night lingered, the cafe, Nicholas Brown's calm voice, the way his gray eyes had seemed to carve into her. She had hired him for one purpose, to silence Marcus. Yet it already felt like she had stepped into something far more dangerous than a game of appearances. By mid-morning, the office was quieter than usual, most of her colleagues taking the weekend to prepare for the event. Natalia preferred the stillness. The clack of her keyboard, the soft hum of fluorescent lights, and the faint scent of paper and ink gave her a fragile sense of control. But control fractured when her phone buzzed against the desk. Unknown number. Good afternoon. Miss White. Before tonight, may I confirm a few details over lunch? Her stomach tightened. She didn't need to ask who it was. Nicholas Brown's words were as precise as his presence. She typed back with fingers that trembled only slightly. Yes. Same cafe. 12:30. When Natalia arrived 5 minutes early this time, he was already there. He sat at the same table near the window, his dark hair perfectly in place, a navy blue shirt rolled neatly at the cuffs. In the daylight, his features looked sharper, his presence even more striking. There was no trace of nerves, no sign of preparation. He looked like he had always belonged in that chair waiting for her. You're punctual, she said, easing into the seat opposite him. Always, he replied as though punctuality was not a courtesy, but a law he obeyed. The waitress appeared, and he ordered without hesitation, black coffee for himself, chamomile tea for her. Natalia blinked, caught off guard. How did you... He said you ordered it last night. His tone matter-of-fact, as though remembering her choice were as natural as breathing. Her lips parted, then pressed shut. She had no reply. Nicholas leaned forward slightly, folding his hands on the table. Your ex-boyfriend, Marcus. What should I know? Natalia's chest tightened. She had expected small talk and questions about the script. Not this. Still, she exhaled slowly. Marcus thrives on attention. He likes to feel superior. If he sees me with you, he'll try to provoke us. He'll push, maybe even publicly. He wants me humiliated. Nicholas's expression did not flicker. Noted. And the others? He asked. Most are fine. But some enjoy gossip. Sandra is in HR. Paolo is in finance. They'll look for cracks in our story, waiting for something to spread. He nodded, the faintest narrowing of his eyes betraying thought. It was not idle interest. It was strategy. He was committing names, faces, patterns to memory, like a chess player studying the board. Natalia shifted uncomfortably. You sound as if you're preparing for a battle. His gaze held hers. Isn't that what this is? She swallowed, unsure whether to be reassured or unnerved. For the next half hour, they rehearsed the story they had crafted where they had met 2 months ago at a cafe near Washington Square, how he had helped when she dropped her laptop. The dinner that followed, the way he remembered small details that had won her over. Each time she hesitated, Nicholas supplied the answer seamlessly. Each time she corrected him, he absorbed it without question. His memory was flawless, his delivery precise. But what unsettled Natalia was not his efficiency. It was his familiarity. When she mentioned Sterling & Company's recent restructuring, his questions were too sharp, too detailed, as though he already knew the company's inner workings. You studied business? She asked suspiciously. A little of everything, he replied vaguely. Her eyes narrowed. That's not an answer. For the first time, he exhaled with a hint of weariness. Nicholas Brown, 32. I live in Manhattan. Yes, I've worked in finance before. What kind of work? Investments. And now his gaze was steady calm. Now I do this occasionally. Her laugh was sharp, incredulous. Is pretending to be someone's boyfriend a hobby? Corporate life, he murmured, is far more boring. The answer wasn't satisfying. But she reminded herself she hadn't hired him for his biography. She had hired him for one night, one purpose: to silence Marcus. As they stood to leave, Nicholas's hand brushed her arm. Not possessive, not hesitant, but grounding. Remember, he said softly, red wine, 3 times. Her pulse quickened at the weight of his words. She nodded, though she didn't understand why the phrase felt less like a joke and more like a shield. The rest of the afternoon passed in fragments, choosing her dress, arranging her hair appointment, laying out the jewelry she had rarely worn. Every detail mattered now. She told herself it was a strategy, but beneath the careful choices lay something else, the sharp awareness that Nicholas would be by her side and that others would see her differently because of it. By evening, the city was alive with anticipation. The Waldorf Astoria glittered against the night chandeliers blazing in windows above Park Avenue. Natalia stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the navy silk of her gown. It clung just enough to flatter without excess, paired with a string of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother. She took one last breath, steadying herself. Tonight was not about Marcus. It wasn't even about Nicholas. It was about her. Her dignity, presence, and voice were about reclaiming what had been stolen. Still, as she slipped the small white card into her clutch, She could not shake the thought that Nicholas Brown was more than he appeared. And that thought, like the city itself, was terrifying and electrifying. The Waldorf Astoria shimmered like a palace under the Manhattan sky, its chandeliers spilling light through the towering windows, its golden doors welcoming the city's elite. Cars lined the curb, drivers in dark coats opening doors for guests, dressed in velvet silk and glittering jewels. The evening hummed with anticipation, 100 conversations colliding in a crescendo of laughter, ambition, and whispered rivalry. Natalia White stood at the entrance, her hand tight around the small clutch. The navy gown draped her frame in quiet elegance, pearls at her throat, catching the chandelier light. She had rehearsed this moment for days, but reality pressed heavier than imagination. She could feel her pulse at her wrists, her throat, her temples. Every part of her screamed of nerves, though her expression betrayed nothing but composure. And then he appeared. Nicholas Brown stepped from the shadows of the lobby, as though he owned the night. His black suit was tailored with meticulous precision, and the subtle gray tie whispered sophistication rather than flaunting it. His posture carried the ease of a man accustomed to control, the kind of presence that turned heads without effort. Natalia. His voice was low, steady, a tether pulling her back to herself. She turned, exhaling slowly, as her gaze met his. "You're here." "Of course." He offered his arm, the gesture commanding yet straightforward. Her fingers slid through the crook of his elbow, and together they stepped into the grand lobby. The ballroom glittered beneath towering chandeliers, their crystals scattering light like shattered stars. White linens draped across tables. Crystal glasses gleamed, and violins played in the background, weaving a melody of refinement. More than 80 employees and guests mingled, their laughter curling like smoke. Natalia felt eyes shift as she entered, the collective murmur of curiosity tightening the space around her. It wasn't just her gown or her pearls. It was Nicholas. Heads turned, whispers stirred. Men recalibrated women's glances, sharpened admiration and envy, sparking in equal measure. "You're nervous," Nicholas murmured near her ear, his tone calm. "A little," she admitted. "Breathe," he said. "You'll be fine." Something in the quiet assurance of his voice steadied her, loosening the knot in her chest. They moved through the crowd with practiced grace, Nicholas's presence anchoring her. The first stop came swiftly. Sandra from HR, notorious for her sharp eyes and sharper tongue. "Natalia," Sandra exclaimed, her voice syrupy with surprise. "You look stunning. And who is this?" "This is Nicholas," Natalia said smoothly, her smile polite. "My boyfriend." Nicholas extended his hand with effortless ease. "Pleasure to meet you, Sandra. Natalia has told me a great deal about you." Sandra flushed, her laugh too bright, too eager. Questions tumbled: how long they had been together, where they had met, and Nicholas answered each with perfect composure, weaving their story as though it were memory instead of fabrication. Natalia watched, equal parts relieved and unsettled. He was flawless, too. Flawless, his charm natural, yet calculated. Sandra melted beneath his gaze, nodding eagerly at every word. From Sandra, they moved to Paulo from finance, a man infamous for testing others with pointed questions. He greeted Nicholas with suspicion veiled as politeness, drawing him into a conversation about investment strategies and global markets. Natalia's breath caught as she listened. Nicholas didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. He spoke with the authority of a man who had lived and breathed the intricacies of finance, his knowledge cutting through Paulo's skepticism like a blade. When the conversation ended, Paulo nodded with something dangerously close to admiration. Natalia's suspicion deepened. This was no hobbyist. Nearly an hour passed before she felt it, the weight of his stare. Marcus. He stood near the bar, his suit immaculate, his glass raised in a too loud laugh. But the moment his eyes landed on her, the laughter faltered. His smile tightened, stretched too thin across his face. "He sees you," Nicholas murmured. "I know," she replied, her voice steady, though her stomach churned. "Shall we go to him?" "Not yet. Let him wonder." Nicholas's lips curved faintly. "I like your strategy." They drifted further into the room, weaving through clusters of colleagues. Natalia could feel the shift, the respect in their glances, the soft awe in their voices. She had spent years being overlooked, dismissed, and her work absorbed into the shadows. Tonight, with Nicholas at her side, the shadows receded. But beneath the new admiration lay another undercurrent. Suspicion. Richard Lang Sterling & Company's chief operating officer finally pierced the charade. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and sharp, calculating eyes that had seen through many masks. Approaching with his usual air of control, he extended his hand to Nicholas. "Nicholas Brown." Richard's tone was casual, but not careless. Nicholas clasped his hand firmly. "That's right." Richard studied him for a long moment. "Do you have any relatives with Brown?" Capital Natalia froze, her breath catching. Nicholas's expression remained calm, unreadable. "Brown is a common name." Richard chuckled, though the flicker in his gaze betrayed something sharper. "Perhaps, but not with your profile." Natalia's pulse raced. "What profile?" she asked quickly, unable to stop herself. "Nothing," Richard said, his smile thin. "Just thought the name sounded familiar." But even as he excused himself, his eyes lingered on Nicholas with unmistakable recognition. Natalia glanced at Nicholas, searching his face. But he gave nothing away. The night pressed on. Marcus approached at last, his smile tight, his charm forced. "Natalia," he said smoothly. "What a surprise." "Marcus." Her tone was even, her gaze steady. "This is Nicholas, my boyfriend." The handshake between the two men was taut, competitive, and the air was charged. So Nicholas Marcus drawled, "What do you do?" "Business consulting," Nicholas replied calmly. "And you?" "Sales," Marcus said with pride. "Top performer here." "Congratulations," Nicholas said smoothly, unfazed. The exchange was simple, polite on the surface, but Natalia could feel the tension beneath. Marcus's attempts to draw her aside failed. Nicholas's presence was unyielding, his calm a shield. When she refused Marcus's request to speak in private, frustration cracked through his charm. "I just wanted to say," Marcus muttered, his voice tight, "I hope you're happy." "Thank you," Natalia said flatly. He left his pride wounded, though his eyes still phased. Natalia exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. She hadn't expected Nicholas to steady her so effortlessly, or his composure to shift the air around them. But she also hadn't expected the dangerous thought that crept into her mind. Who exactly had she brought into her life? The ballroom shifted to softer rhythms as the evening stretched into music and wine. Strings floated above the chatter, drawing couples to the dance floor. Nicholas stood beside her, his arm warm and steady against her back, his voice low near her ear. "Relax. You've already won." Her eyes flicked toward Marcus, sulking at the bar. His jaw tight, his glass clutched too firmly. A flicker of satisfaction stirred inside her. She looked up at Nicholas. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know men like him," he replied. "They fight to control the room, and when someone else commands the attention, they unravel." His gaze lingered on Marcus briefly, before returning to her, steady and unyielding. Natalia swallowed her chest, tightening with something she hadn't planned for. Tonight was supposed to be about pride, about dignity, about silencing Marcus. It wasn't supposed to be about the way Nicholas's calm disarmed her, the way his presence stirred feelings she had long buried. Yet here she was, standing in the glow of chandeliers, her heart betraying her with every unsteady beat. Later, as they stepped out into the crisp Manhattan night, the city glittered with lights against the dark sky. Natalia tucked her clutch tighter against her body, her thoughts tangled in the evening's revelations. "You were flawless," she said quietly. Nicholas glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "It was my pleasure." But then she asked, unable to hold back brown capital, "Do you know it?" For the first time all night, his smile faltered just slightly. "Good night, Natalia," he said gently, opening the door of the waiting car. She slid inside, her pulse racing. As the vehicle pulled away, she looked back through the glass. He was still standing there on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on her. And in that moment, one truth burned clear inside her. Nicholas Brown was not who he claimed to be. The morning after the gala dawned, gray Manhattan wrapped in a veil of mist, the skyline blurred behind drifting clouds, its usual sharp brilliance softened into watercolor shades. Natalia White sat by her apartment window, a cup of untouched coffee cooling between her palms, her thoughts running circles around the night before. Nicholas Brown. She whispered his name as though testing it on her tongue. It had felt so natural last night, his presence steady, his gaze grounding. But the moment Richard Lang had spoken of Brown Capital, something in her had shifted. Nicholas's eyes, confident through every exchange, had betrayed a single flicker of hesitation. And that hesitation was enough to seed suspicion deep in her chest. Natalia was not naive. She grew up in Brooklyn, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and taught her to read between the lines of every promise and polished smile. Life had shown her that charm was often a mask, and anything from tenderness to betrayal could lie beneath it. So why did she feel so torn? Her phone buzzed on the table, a message from Nicholas. "Thank you for last night. You were extraordinary." Her fingers hovered over the screen, her chest tightening. She wanted to reply to let herself bask in his calm warmth, but instead she set the phone down and rose, her decision made. If Nicholas was hiding something she needed to know. The office at Sterling and Comey was buzzing that morning, conversation still orbiting around the gala. Natalia moved through the hallways with practiced composure, though her mind was elsewhere. She could still feel the weight of curious eyes from the night before, whispers curling like smoke around her name. For once, she wasn't the woman standing in the background. She had been seen. But had she been seen because of Nicholas, or because of herself? She opened her laptop at her desk, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. She typed, "Brown Capital Nicholas Brown," into the search bar. Her breath held as the screen filled with results. The first article struck like a hammer. Brown Capital Billionaire. Nicholas Brown expands global holdings. Natalia blinked, her pulse racing. The headline was accompanied by a photo of Nicholas in the same suit with calm eyes. Only this time, he wasn't standing beside her in the soft glow of chandeliers. He was on the front page of Forbes, framed by a skyline of international offices and an empire worth billions. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. Article after article unfolded a story she hadn't expected. Nicholas Brown wasn't a consultant. He wasn't an anonymous figure playing the part of her partner for one night. He was one of the most powerful men in American finance, a billionaire whose decisions rippled across markets, whose presence at any event would ignite headlines. And yet, at the gala, he had stood quietly at her side, never once flaunting who he was. Why? The afternoon stretched heavy with questions. Natalia barely noticed her colleagues' chatter and tasted her lunch. Her thoughts tangled themselves around Nicholas's silence and the faint crack in his mask when Richard Lang spoke his name. By evening, she couldn't resist. She called him. The line rang twice before his voice answered, low and steady as ever. "Natalia." Her breath caught. "We need to talk." "Where?" "Somewhere quiet." There was a pause then. I'll send you an address. Moments later, her phone buzzed with a message. The cafe was tucked away on a quiet street in Greenwich Village, its brick walls lined with shelves of books, the air warm with the scent of cinnamon and coffee. It was the place people came to disappear, not to be seen. Nicholas was already there, seated at a corner table, his suit traded for a dark sweater that softened the sharpness of his presence. His eyes lifted when she entered, calm but unreadable. "You found me," he said softly as she sat across from him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her words were quiet, but they carried an edge. Why pretend to be someone else? Nicholas leaned back, his hands clasped on the table. "Because I wanted you to see me without the noise, without the weight of my name. You let me think you were a consultant. Do you realize how humiliating it was to discover the truth like this?" "I never lied about who I am," he replied evenly. "I only left out what the world already obsesses over. My money, my influence. None of that mattered when I was standing beside you." His calm steadiness infuriated her. "It mattered to me. Do you understand how it feels to discover that the man you trusted for one night is a billionaire hiding behind a mask?" Nicholas's gaze softened, the faintest vulnerability slipping through. "Do you understand how it feels to wonder if anyone will ever see me, not the empire, the headlines, or the man beneath it all?" Her breath faltered. She hadn't expected that. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the cafe. Natalia looked away, her thoughts battling. She had wanted answers, but his words cracked something inside her. She remembered how he had steadied her at the gala, how his presence had shielded her from Marcus's cruel gaze, and how his voice had grounded her when her nerves had threatened to betray her. And yet the deception lingered. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I wanted to," Nicholas admitted. "But once I saw how you looked at me, not with calculation, not with expectation, I couldn't break it. For one night, Natalia, I wasn't a billionaire. I was just a man standing beside a woman who deserved the world's respect." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She did believe him. But accepting him meant risking her heart. They spoke little after that, the quiet carrying more weight than words. When they finally stepped outside, the city was painted in twilight, the air cool against her skin. "Will you let me prove myself to you?" Nicholas asked, his voice low. Natalia met his gaze, her chest tight with conflict. "I don't know if I can trust you." "Then let me earn it," he said. And for the first time, Nicholas Brown, billionaire mogul man, who commanded boardrooms and headlines, looked almost fragile, as though her answer could undo him. Natalia said nothing. She turned and walked away, her heart a storm of longing and doubt. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in the dark, the city lights spilling across her ceiling, Nicholas's words echoing in her mind. "For one night, I wasn't a billionaire. I was just a man." She closed her eyes, remembering the steadiness of his presence, the softness in his gaze when Marcus had cornered her, the calm in his voice that had anchored her. But could she fall for a man whose life was built on a scale so far from her own? Could she risk being just another chapter in the story of Nicholas Brown, billionaire? Natalia didn't know. All she knew was that the line between her defenses and desires had grown dangerously thin. The following morning, a delivery arrived at her apartment, a single white envelope, her name written in elegant script. Inside was a handwritten note. "You once said your dream was to see the city from above, where the noise fades and the lights feel like stars. Tonight, 7 o'clock. N." Beneath it was a ticket for a helicopter ride over Manhattan. Natalia's heart pounded as she stared at it, her fingers trembling. He remembered. The memory returned one quiet conversation weeks ago, when she had confessed her longing to see the city from the sky, to feel for just a moment that she could rise above everything. She had spoken of it half in jest, never imagining he had truly listened. And yet, here it was. Her choice, unspoken but undeniable, hovered in the space between them. As twilight descended, Manhattan's skyline burned gold, the river catching the last light like molten glass. Natalia stood at the helipad, the city sprawling endlessly beneath her, her breath sharp with anticipation. The blades of the helicopter spun the air, whipping around her. Nicholas was there, his figure framed by the glow of the city, his eyes steady as they found hers. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, offering his hand. She hesitated only a moment before placing hers in his. The machine lifted the city, falling away beneath them, the streets shrinking into glowing threads, the towers catching the last light of day. Natalia pressed her cheek against the glass, her heart thundering. The city she had walked all her life now shimmered below like a dream, vast and fragile. Nicholas's voice cut through the roar of the engine. "So beautiful." She turned to him, catching his gaze. In his eyes, she saw no empire, no fortune, only a man reaching for her quietly, desperately, as though she were the only thing that mattered. At that moment, for the first time, Natalia wondered if Nicholas Brown had been telling the truth all along, beneath the mask of the billionaire. The helicopter soared above Manhattan, slicing through the twilight, like a bird unbound. Beneath them, the city glittered in 1,000 shades of gold and silver, each light flickering like a secret whispered into the night. Natalia pressed her cheek to the cool glass, her breath catching as the skyline unfolded in endless majesty. The familiar streets, the ones she had walked countless times, weary after long days at the firm, now transformed into a constellation. From here, the chaos softened. From here, life seemed possible, even forgiving. Beside her, Nicholas sat with the stillness of a man who had seen this view 100 times, yet found it new through her eyes. More than the city, his gaze was fixed on her, on the wonder etched across her face, the faint curve of her lips, the way her eyes glistened against the play of light. "You remembered?" she said softly, her voice barely audible over the engine's roar. Nicholas leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. "I remember everything you say." The words were simple, but they rooted themselves deep in her chest, disarming her more than any extravagant gesture could. When the helicopter landed, they stepped onto the rooftop of a private terrace. The city stretched in every direction, skyscrapers piercing the night sky, the Hudson glimmering like black silk, threaded with light. A table was set at the edge, 2 glasses catching the moonlight. Natalia hesitated. "You planned all of this?" Nicholas's lips curved into a faint smile. "Only because I meant it when I said I wanted to prove myself." She folded her arms, her defenses rising out of instinct. Grand gestures don't erase secrets. "No," he agreed, his tone steady, "but they can open doors to truths." Something in his eyes stilled her protests. It wasn't arrogance she found there, nor the polished assurance a man used to command. It was something quieter, vulnerability perhaps, or the raw weight of confession waiting to be spoken. They sat at the table, the city humming beneath them like a living thing. Nicholas poured wine, his movements measured, unhurried. Natalia lifted her glass, the deep red, reflecting the skyline's glow. For a moment, they drank in silence. The air between them pulsed with all the words unsaid, with the storm that had been gathering since the gala. Finally, Nicholas set his glass down and spoke. "I know you have questions, and I know I've given you reasons to doubt me. Tonight, I want to provide you with only the truth." Natalia's breath quickened. She braced herself, every nerve taut. "My life has been noise." Nicholas began, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the glittering horizon. Every move I made became a headline when I inherited brown capital. Every decision weighed against billions of dollars. Every mistake dissected like blood in the water. He paused, his jaw tightening. And with the noise came expectations. People saw not me, but what I could offer. Influence, wealth, proximity to power. No one asked who Nicholas Brown was beneath it all, because they didn't care. They only cared what he could give. Natalia studied him, her defenses shifting like fragile glass. She had expected excuses, rehearsed lines, polished by years of boardroom diplomacy. But what she heard was something else, exhaustion, raw and unfiltered. So when I met you, Nicholas continued, his eyes finding hers at last, I wanted for once to step out of that noise, to see if someone could look at me without the headlines shadowing their eyes. That's why I didn't tell you who I was. Natalia's throat tightened. And if Richard Lang hadn't exposed you, Nicholas's lips pressed into a thin line. I would have told you, when I dared to believe you might stay. The confession hung in the air, delicate as spun glass. Natalia's heart wavered between indignation and understanding. She thought of her mother, of nights spent struggling to keep their world afloat. Wealth had always been untouchable to her, a force that divided lives like a wall. And now a man who possessed more than she could fathom sat speaking as though his fortune were a cage. Do you expect me to feel sorry for you? She asked quietly, though her voice carried less bite than she intended. No, Nicholas said. I don't expect anything. I only want you to see me. She looked away, her chest a storm. His words rattled something inside her, something she had buried beneath years of resilience. For so long she had fought to be seen in a world that dismissed women like her, women with skin the color of hers, women who carried grace and burden in equal measure. And now, here was Nicholas asking for the same thing, for recognition beyond surface, beyond assumption. For a fleeting moment, she felt the sharp edges of their worlds blur. Tell me this, Natalia said, her gaze steady as it returned to his. What happens if I walk away tonight? Nicholas's expression shifted, a shadow crossing his face. Then I'll let you. I won't chase you into something you don't want. But I'll tell you one truth. Before you go meeting, you has been the only real moment in years. The words struck her like a tide. She wanted to dismiss them as charm, as the practiced rhythm of a man who knew how to wield his voice. But there was no polish in his tone, no calculation. Only sincerity so stark, it unsettled her. Silence wrapped around them again, thick with unspoken possibility. The city roared below, its millions of lives, weaving stories of ambition and survival, love and loss. And yet on that terrace, it felt as though time had paused, waiting for her answer. Natalia's chest rose and fell with each breath. Part of her longed to retreat, to protect herself from the danger of his world, from the inevitability of heartbreak. But another part, a quieter, deeper part, ached to step closer to test the truth of the man who had so carefully revealed himself. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. I don't know if I can trust you. Nicholas reached across the table, his hand hovering above hers. He didn't touch, didn't press, only offered. Then let me earn it, one day at a time. Her fingers trembled. Slowly, hesitantly, she let her hand fall into his. The contact was simple, but it shattered something within her walls. Warmth spread from his touch, quiet but steady, like a promise. For the first time since the gala, Natalia allowed herself to breathe. They sat there, hands entwined, the skyline, stretching infinitely around them. Words became unnecessary. Trust thin and uncertain, but present began to take root in the fragile quiet. Later, Nicholas paused as he walked her to the car waiting below. The night air was crisp, the city alive with the hum of distant horns. "Natalia," he said, his voice low, "I don't know where this will lead, but I know I don't want it to end here." She looked at him, at the man who had confessed his truth beneath the mask of wealth, and found herself caught between fear and desire. "Neither do I," she admitted softly. Nicholas's eyes softened, the faintest curve of relief at his lips. He opened the door for her, and for a moment, the simplicity of the gesture carried more weight than any grand display. That night, long after she returned home, Natalia lay awake in bed, the city lights painting her walls. She thought of his confession, the raw honesty in his voice, and the quiet plea hidden beneath his words. And she thought of her heart, fragile yet fierce, daring to hope in a world that had taught her caution. For the first time in years, Natalia White asked herself if trust, tentative and trembling, could grow where least expected. The morning after Nicholas's confession dawned in muted shades of gray, the city stirring beneath a sky heavy with clouds. Natalia woke to the faint hum of traffic outside her apartment window, the world resuming its rhythm, as though nothing monumental had occurred. But for her, everything had shifted. She sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling between her hands, replaying every word Nicholas had spoken. His stark and unexpected vulnerability had unraveled something in her that she could no longer ignore. For years, she had carried her life like armor, protecting herself against disappointment, against the sharp edges of a world that too often sought to diminish her. And yet one evening on a rooftop terrace had left cracks in that armor, fragile but undeniable. Her phone vibrated against the table. She hesitated before glancing at the screen. A simple message from Nicholas glowed back at her. "Dinner tonight, somewhere quiet. No noise, just us." Natalia's heart fluttered in betrayal of her cautious mind. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, debating. Finally, she typed back, "Where?" That evening, a sleek car pulled up outside her building, but it wasn't the ostentatious luxury she had braced herself for. The driver greeted her politely and opened the door to a discreet black sedan, elegant, understated, far from the flash she expected from a man with his wealth. The restaurant he had chosen was hidden in a corner of the West Village, with dim lights, weathered brick walls, and soft jazz humming in the background. Not a paparazzi magnet, not the polished marble of Midtown. Instead, it felt like a refuge. Nicholas was already there, waiting at a small table, tucked into the corner. When he saw her, he rose, his gaze softening in a way that disarmed her again. "You came," he said. "You asked," she replied, slipping into the chair across from him. The evening unfolded with a surprising ease. They spoke of small things first. The city's rhythm books they had loved, memories of places that had shaped them. Natalia found herself laughing more than she expected, the sound startling her with its unfamiliar freedom. Nicholas listened, truly, listened, his attention unwavering. It wasn't the charm of a man seeking to impress. It was the sincerity of someone who wanted to know her, not just occupy her presence. But as the night deepened, so too did the conversation. "Your world," Natalia said quietly, tracing the rim of her glass. "It doesn't leave much room for people like me." Nicholas frowned, leaning forward. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze unflinching. "I've spent my entire life working twice as hard to be seen half as much. Women like me don't walk into boardrooms and get welcomed. We walk in and get questioned, judged, and measured before we even open our mouths. And then you—" She gestured toward him, her voice trembling between accusation and longing. "You appear with all the power and privilege that has shaped you, and you ask me to trust that your world won't crush me." The words hung between them, heavy and raw. Nicholas didn't flinch. He reached across the table, his hand resting gently atop hers. Natalia. He said, his voice low, steady. I can't erase the weight of what you've carried. And I can't change the fact that the world sees us differently. But I can promise you this. I won't let that world swallow us. Not without a fight. Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that promises could withstand the scrutiny of reality. Reality, as it turned out, arrived sooner than expected. Nicholas invited her to an art gala at the Metropolitan Museum a week later. It's small, he assured her. Not one of the headline events, just a gathering of collectors and patrons. Natalia hesitated, but agreed. She spent hours debating what to wear, finally settling on a deep emerald gown that elegantly hugged her frame. Standing before the mirror, she felt the old insecurities whisper. Would she look out of place? Would people stare and see only what they expected, not who she was? When Nicholas arrived to pick her up, his eyes widened, his breath catching audibly. You're extraordinary, he murmured, offering his arm. She forced a smile, steadying herself against the storm she knew awaited. The gala sparkled with opulence, chandeliers dripping with light, champagne glasses, clinking laughter rippling through the air like a rehearsed melody. Nicholas walked beside her, his presence commanding the room effortlessly. Heads turned, conversations paused, and Natalia felt the weight of every gaze. Some were curious, others appraising, and a few she noticed with a sharp pang were veiled with disapproval. Whispers followed them, subtle, but unmistakable. Is that her? She's not what I expected. Do you think it's serious? Natalia's grip on Nicholas's arm tightened, her pulse racing. She had braced herself for this, but preparation did little to dull the sting of being dissected by strangers who saw only surfaces. Nicholas leaned closer, his lips near her ear. Ignore them. They don't matter. But they did matter. The scrutiny seeped into her bones, reminding her of every moment she had fought to prove her worth, in rooms where she was underestimated. Here, under the shimmering lights of privilege, the fight felt endless. Later in the evening, as Nicholas excused himself to greet an acquaintance, Natalia stood alone by a marble column. A woman approached, elegant in a gown of silver silk, her smile poised yet sharp. You must be Natalia, the woman said, her tone dripping with condescension. I've heard quite a lot about you. Natalia lifted her chin. All good things, I hope. The woman's smile didn't waver. Nicholas has always had a taste for the unconventional. I suppose it's refreshing for him to step outside the expected circles. The implication was clear. Natalia's chest burned, but she held her composure. Or perhaps she replied evenly, he values authenticity over expectation. For a moment, the woman's smile faltered. Natalia seized the silence and stepped away, her spine straight, her pride intact. But inside her heart ached. When Nicholas returned, he noticed the shadow in her eyes. What happened? He asked quietly. Natalia shook her head. Nothing I haven't heard before. The hurt in her tone cut deeper than any accusation. Nicholas's jaw tightened, his gaze sweeping the room with cold precision. He took her hand, leading her away from the crowd. The night air on the museum's terrace wrapped around them, calm and unfiltered. Nicholas turned to her, his expression fierce. He said, I won't let them touch you. His voice sharp with conviction. Not their words, not their judgments. You are stronger than any of them, and belong by my side regardless of their thoughts. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. Nicholas, it's not just about them. It's about the world we live in. People like me are constantly forced to defend our place in it. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. Then let me stand with you. Let me fight beside you, because I can't. His voice broke slightly, the vulnerability raw. I can't imagine walking through any of this without you. Her defenses, so carefully built, trembled beneath the weight of his plea. Nicholas insisted on driving her home as the night drew to a close. The city blurred past the car windows, lights streaking like fragments of memory. Natalia leaned against the seat, her thoughts tangled with hope and fear. She wanted to believe him, to think that love could shield them against a world that seemed determined to test their bond. And as she glanced at Nicholas, his profile illuminated by the passing glow of streetlights, she realized something undeniable. He wasn't just asking her to step into his world. He was offering to step into hers. And that perhaps was the most dangerous promise of all. That night, long after she closed her apartment door behind her, Natalia stood at the window, gazing out over the city. Her reflection stared back, eyes filled with uncertainty and longing. The worlds they came from had collided, their differences laid bare under the scrutiny of society. And yet beneath the weight of it all, a fragile truth persisted. She was falling for him. And no amount of fear could change that. The days following the gala passed in a blur of contradictions. For every tender word Nicholas spoke, every lingering glance that seemed to tether Natalia to him more securely, there was an undercurrent of tension neither dared to address. The night at the museum had revealed the sharp edge of their reality. They were not just two people stumbling into love. They were a disruption, an anomaly that would not be quietly accepted. Natalia tried to return to her routine, grounding herself in the familiar, the small coffee shop she favored in Harlem, the long walks through Riverside Park, where autumn leaves crunched beneath her boots. Yet even in these moments, Nicholas lingered in her thoughts, his voice echoing with promises that felt both intoxicating and impossible. Nicholas, for his part, seemed more determined than ever to draw her closer. He invited her to private dinners, accompanied her to art exhibits, and even ventured into her world with a reverence that surprised her. He sat in cramped cafes without complaint, walked hand in hand through crowded Harlem streets, as though he were not a man accustomed to commanding space. And yet cracks had begun to appear. One afternoon her phone rang as Natalia arranged sketches for a project she had been working on, a proposal to restore a historic brownstone in her neighborhood. She answered with a distracted smile, expecting Nicholas's familiar tone. Instead, it was her friend Evelyn. Natalia. Evelyn began, her voice tight. "I don't know if I should tell you this, but maybe you should hear it from me." Natalia's stomach tightened. "Tell me what—" "There's an article. Page 6. It's about Nicholas. About you." The words hit like a cold slap. Natalia fumbled to open her laptop, her hands trembling as she searched. There it was, a glossy headline accompanied by a grainy photograph from the gala. Billionaire Nicholas Brown's new flame. A mysterious beauty from Harlem. Her chest constricted as she skimmed the article. The words dripped with insinuation, framing her as an enigma, an outsider, someone suddenly appearing in Nicholas's orbit with no discernible pedigree. Every sentence seemed designed to raise eyebrows, stoke curiosity, and whisper that she did not belong. Her phone buzzed again. Evelyn was waiting for a response. Natalia forced her voice to steady. "Thank you for telling me. I'll handle it." But when she hung up, she sat frozen, staring at the article until the words blurred. Nicholas arrived at her apartment that evening, carrying a bottle of wine and a look of quiet anticipation. But when Natalia opened the door, her expression was stormy, her eyes rimmed with unshed tears. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, holding up her phone with the article pulled up. Nicholas's smile faltered. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to spare you this." "It's noise, Natalia. That's all it is. They thrive on gossip." "Noise," she repeated, her voice sharp. "They're dissecting me like I'm some novelty item, like I'm an exotic accessory you've decided to parade around." He flinched. "That's not what this is. That's not what you are. Then why does it feel like it?" The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of traffic outside. Nicholas set the wine down, his jaw tight. "I can't control the press," he said finally. "But I can control us. And I don't care what they write. I only care about you." Natalia's chest ached with conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe him. She tried to lose herself in the warmth of his words. But the sting of public scrutiny was real, and she had lived long enough to know how quickly perception could turn cruel. The fracture widened a few days later. Nicholas invited her to his penthouse, an opulent glass and steel space, towering over the city like a crown. Natalia entered uneased the vastness of the rooms, reminding her of how different their worlds were. As they shared dinner, Nicholas's phone buzzed incessantly. He tried to ignore it, but eventually, with a grimace, he excused himself to answer. Natalia wandered through the apartment, pausing before a series of framed photographs on the wall. They depicted Nicholas at galas, charity functions, and business launches. In nearly every photo, a woman stood at his side, elegant blonde, impeccably dressed. Her name surfaced from memory: Cassandra Whitmore. Heiress to a fortune fixture of society pages, rumored to have been Nicholas's longtime companion. The sight of her immortalized in glossy images twisted something profound in Natalia's chest. When Nicholas returned, she gestured toward the photos. "Do you still love her?" His eyes widened. "What? Noma Cassandra and I ended years ago. Then why is she still everywhere in your home?" Natalia's voice trembled despite her effort to remain calm. "Because," Nicholas said, frustration creeping into his tone, "this life doesn't erase itself overnight. I can take the photos down if that's what you want. But Natalia, don't let ghosts of the past dictate what we could have." She swallowed hard, looking away. "It's not just ghosts. It's a reminder that your world already had someone like her in mind for you. Not me." Nicholas stepped closer, his voice fierce. "I don't want Cassandra. I want you. Do you hear me, you?" But the doubt had already lodged in her heart, sharp and unyielding. The first fracture became undeniable one rainy evening, when Natalia found herself waiting at a small restaurant in Harlem, a place she had chosen because it felt like home. Nicholas was supposed to meet her there, no press, no gala, just them. She waited. Minutes slipped into an hour. The rain streaked down the windows, blurring the city lights. Natalia checked her phone repeatedly, her stomach tightening with each unanswered call. Finally, a message arrived. "Caught in a meeting. I'm sorry. Can I make it up to you tomorrow?" Her chest tightened with anger and disappointment. She stared at the message until the words blurred, until the ache in her throat grew unbearable. For years, she had told herself she would never allow her worth to be diminished by anyone's absence. Yet here she was, sitting alone at a table set for two, her heart tethered to a man who seemed to live in a world where she would never come first. When she returned home that night, Evelyn was waiting with a bottle of wine and a knowing look. "You've fallen for him," Evelyn said softly, pouring them both a glass. Natalia sighed, curling up on the couch. "I didn't mean to, but it feels inevitable." Evelyn studied her gaze both protective and compassionate. "Love isn't meant to make you feel small, Nat. It's supposed to make you feel seen. Ask yourself, does Nicholas see all of you, or only the parts that fit into his world?" The question lingered long after Evelyn left. Natalia lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, torn between the intensity of her feelings and the fear of losing herself in the process. Nicholas, meanwhile, sat in his office overlooking the city, a glass of scotch untouched at his side. The meeting he had been trapped in had been a blur, his mind elsewhere, his chest aching with guilt. He knew he had failed her tonight. He knew the wounds from the gala, the article, and Cassandra's shadow had already carved lines of doubt between them. And for the first time, Nicholas felt something he had never allowed himself to think in business or life: fear. Fear that he might lose her. fear that love so rare and unrelenting might slip through his grasp because of the world he had built around himself. The fracture between them was not yet a chasm. They still reached for one another in quiet moments, still found solace in the heat of stolen kisses and whispered confessions. But the cracks were there, undeniably weaving through the foundation of their building. And both knew, though neither admitted aloud, that fractures left untended could one day shatter everything. The fracture had been growing quietly like a hairline crack in glass, hardly visible at first, but always there waiting for the proper pressure to open it. For Nicholas and Natalia, that pressure came sooner than either expected. It began with a phone call. Natalia was at her office reviewing plans for the brownstone restoration project she had poured months into. The phone buzzed, and she answered, expecting a colleague's voice. Instead, it was a stranger. Miss White. The voice was smooth-clipped with the confidence of someone accustomed to control. "This is Cassandra Whitmore. Let's meet." The name sent a chill down Natalia's spine. She had seen Cassandra's face too many times in Nicholas's world, framed in photographs, whispered about in articles, floating like a phantom in the background of their relationship. "I don't see why we need to," Natalia said carefully. "Oh, but you do," Cassandra replied, her tone a velvet blade. "For your own sake." The call ended before Natalia could respond. They met in a private lounge at the Plaza Cassandra, arriving with the poise of a queen surveying her kingdom. She was everything the photo suggested: tall, blonde, elegant, with a gaze that assessed Natalia as though she were an intruder, trespassing on sacred ground. "Let's not waste time," Cassandra began, crossing one leg over the other. "Nicholas and I may no longer be together, but our circles are not so easily abandoned." "Do you understand what that means?" Natalia said nothing. Her hands folded tightly in her lap. Cassandra's smile was thin. "You think he can give you forever, but men like Nicholas don't change. He's bred for power, for alliances that strengthen his empire. You, Miss White, are an interlude, a charming distraction. But that's all." The words landed like poison. Natalia fought to maintain composure, though her pulse thundered in her ears. "You don't know what we are," she said finally. "I don't need to know," Cassandra replied coolly. "I've lived it. I've been the woman at his side, the one the press approved of, the one his board of directors paraded. And yet even I wasn't enough for him. Do you genuinely believe you'll fare better?" When the meeting ended, Natalia walked out into the evening air, her chest tight, her confidence shaken. She wanted to dismiss Cassandra's words as bitterness and jealousy, but they burrowed deep, awakening fears she had tried to silence. That night, when Nicholas came to her apartment, Natalia didn't mention Cassandra. She couldn't bear to admit that doubt had already been sown. But Nicholas, perceptive as ever, sensed something. "You're quiet tonight," he said, brushing his thumb over her hand. "I'm just tired," she lied, forcing a smile. But the lie weighed heavily. The breaking point came 2 days later, at a charity gala Nicholas had insisted she attend. "It'll be small," he promised, "nothing like the museum, just a gathering of colleagues and donors. I want you there with me." Reluctantly, she agreed. The event was held at a penthouse overlooking Central Park, the city glittering below like a sea of diamonds. Natalia wore a simple black dress that hugged her form, elegant yet understated. Nicholas never let go of her hand, introducing her to everyone with a quiet pride that warmed her even as she felt the weight of curious stares. But then Cassandra appeared. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her gown shimmering silver under the lights. When her gaze met Nicholas's, she smiled, too familiar, too knowing. And when she approached, Natalia's stomach clenched. "Nicholas," Cassandra purred, her voice laced with nostalgia. "It's been too long." Nicholas stiffened, but remained polite. "Cassandra." Her eyes flicked to Natalia, lingering long enough to make her point. And this must be the woman everyone's whispering about. Natalia forced a polite nod. Natalia White. Cassandra's lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. Charmed, I'm sure. Throughout the evening, Cassandra lingered at the edges of their conversations. Her presence a shadow Natalia could not escape. At one point, Natalia overheard her laughing softly with Nicholas, recalling a memory they shared, a trip to Paris, a mishap with champagne at a rooftop dinner. Nicholas smiled politely, but the image of it tore at Natalia's heart. By the night's end, Natalia excused herself, claiming she needed air. She slipped onto the terrace, the chill of the evening wrapping around her. Moments later, Nicholas followed. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched on his face. She turned, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "Why didn't you tell me she would be here?" "I didn't know," Nicholas replied, his brow furrowing. "I wouldn't have brought you if I had." "But she's everywhere, Nicholas. In your photos, your events, your world. She made it clear tonight, people still see her as your match, not me." Nicholas stepped forward, frustration flashing in his eyes. "I don't care what they see. I care about us. Why can't you believe that? Because it's not just about us." Natalia's voice broke, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm the one they dissect in articles, the one whispered about like I don't belong. And maybe I don't." The silence that followed was devastating. Nicholas reached for her, but she stepped back, her chest heaving. "Nat." His voice was low, pleading. But Natalia shook her head, her heart fracturing under doubt and fear. "I can't do this, Nicholas. Not if it means losing myself." With that, she turned and walked away, her heels echoing against the stone, each step pulling her further from him. That night, Nicholas sat alone in his penthouse, the city sprawling endlessly below. For the first time in years, the empire he had built felt hollow. His phone lay untouched on the table, her absence heavier than any loss he had ever endured in business. He replayed their fight in his mind, every word cutting deeper. He thought of Cassandra, of the poison she had undoubtedly poured into Natalia's thoughts. Rage burned in him, not at Natalia, but at the cruel world that insisted on judging what they shared. But beneath the anger was fear, the fear that he had already lost her. Natalia, meanwhile, returned to her apartment and collapsed onto her couch, her body trembling with the weight of emotion. Evelyn arrived soon after, summoned by a tearful phone call. She was there. Natalia whispered, her voice raw. "Cassandra. She made it clear that I'll never belong in his world." Evelyn wrapped her in a hug, her voice firm. "Nat, don't let that woman decide your worth. She thrives on power games. Nicholas loves you, anyone can see it." But Natalia shook her head, tears spilling freely. Love isn't always enough, not when the world wants to tear it apart. The days that followed were empty. Nicholas called, texted, left messages that Natalia couldn't bring herself to answer. Each time his name lit up her phone, her chest ached with longing, but she silenced it, convincing herself distance was safer. And yet, at night, she lay awake thinking of him, the way he looked at her, as if she were the only person in the world, and his touch ignited something she had never known before. She wanted him. She loved him. But she was terrified of what that love might cost. For Nicholas, the silence was unbearable. He was a man accustomed to control, to bending circumstances to his will. But with Natalia, his power meant nothing. He couldn't buy her trust, couldn't negotiate her fears. So he made a decision. If he were to win her back, it wouldn't be through words whispered in the dark or promises made over champagne. It would have to be through action, through showing her that their love was not fragile, not temporary, not something that could be dismissed by gossip or ghosts of the past. And as he looked over the city, one sleepless night, Nicholas vowed not to let her go. Not now. Not ever. The city had its way of swallowing silence. In the penthouse above Manhattan's skyline, Nicholas Brown stood at the window, his reflection fractured in the glass, the weight of days without Natalia pressing down on him like stone. He had faced business crises, endured betrayals in boardrooms, and stared down the most ruthless competitors. But nothing compared to the helplessness of watching her slip from his life. And yet Nicholas was not a man who surrendered easily. He knew he had to show her not with words, but with something undeniable, that she belonged by his side, not as a shadow in someone else's world, but as the woman he loved, the woman he was willing to risk everything for. Nicholas called in favors and summoned contacts he rarely used outside of business. But this time, it wasn't for an empire or a profit margin. It was for her. By the week's end, he had arranged something few men of his stature would dare, a public declaration that would silence every whisper and doubt Cassandra or society had planted. But first, he went to her. Natalia opened the door to her apartment and froze when she saw him. Nicholas stood there dressed simply in a charcoal coat, without any bodyguards or entourage. Just him. His eyes held the weariness of sleepless nights, but a determination she hadn't seen before burned beneath it. "Nicholas," her voice faltered. "Why are you here?" "Because I can't let this end like it did," he said, stepping inside only when she moved aside. "Nat, I've spent days trying to respect your silence, but I can't breathe without you, and I won't let the ghosts of my past steal what we have." She swallowed, her hands trembling at her sides. "It's not just your past, Nicholas. It's your world, and I don't know if I fit in it." "You're not meant to fit into my world," he said firmly. "We're meant to build a new one together, you and me." Her heart thudded, torn between the longing to believe and the fear of being broken again. "You don't understand what they say about me, about us." Nicholas reached for her hand, his grip warm, steady. "Then let me show them what I say about us." 2 nights later, Natalia found herself in a place she never expected to be. The Metropolitan Museum of Art ballroom, transformed for one of the most prestigious galas of the year. She hadn't agreed lightly. Nicholas had told her only, "Trust me. Come." And though doubt gnawed at her, something in his eyes that night had whispered, she couldn't walk away. The room glittered with New York's elite philanthropists, politicians, media moguls. It was the crowd where every movement was dissected, every pairing analyzed for meaning. Natalia felt its weight the moment she entered, her hand in Nicholas's. The stares, the whispers, they were louder than ever. Cassandra was there too, radiant in emerald silk, her smile sharp as glass when she saw them. Natalia's stomach twisted. But Nicholas didn't flinch. As the night unfolded, speeches were given and donations pledged. And then Nicholas rose from his seat at the head table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying through the room, calm yet commanding. The murmurs died down. Cameras turned. "I won't take long." He looked out over the glittering sea of faces, then down at Natalia. "Many of you know me as a businessman. Some of you know me as an ally, a rival, a friend. But very few of you know me as I truly am. Tonight I want to change that." The room hushed, rapt. Nicholas continued, his voice unwavering. "For years I believed power was measured by what you built, owned, and controlled. But then I met someone who showed me that real power, the kind that changes you, comes from love. From standing beside someone, even when the world tells you not to. That someone is Natalia White." Gasps rippled through the room. Cassandra's smile faltered. Natalia's breath caught in her chest. Nicholas stepped closer to where Natalia sat, every eye following him. "I love her, and I will not let whispers, prejudice, or expectation dictate who I choose. This is not a distraction. She is not an interlude. She is my future." He extended his hand. "Natalia, Will you stand with me? The room was a storm, cameras flashing, voices rising in disbelief and awe. Natalia felt the world tilt beneath her, the weight of every judgment pressing down. But when she looked into Nicholas's eyes, she saw none. She saw only him, steady, unyielding, waiting. Her pulse raced. Every fear, every wound whispered at her to run. But then, stronger than the fear, came the memory of how he had held her in quiet moments, how he had listened, how he had seen her not as the world labeled her, but as she truly was. Slowly, Natalia rose. The room erupted in murmurs, but she barely heard them. She slipped her hand into his, her voice trembling but sure. "Yes, Nicholas, I'll stand with you." The following applause was not unanimous. Some clapped politely, others stiffly, some not. But it didn't matter. At that moment, Natalia realized she no longer needed to belong to their world. She had created her own one built on love, not approval. Nicholas lifted her hand and kissed it, his lips lingering. "Then let them talk," he whispered for her ears alone. Later that night, in the quiet of his car, as the city lights streaked by, Natalia leaned into him, exhaustion and relief washing over her. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "Yes, I did," he replied, kissing her head. "Because I needed you to know I will fight for you. Always." She smiled softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. For the first time in weeks, the fear that had haunted her began to dissolve, replaced by something more substantial: faith. Faith that love could be enough. As dawn broke over Manhattan the next morning, Natalia stood at Nicholas's window, watching the city wake beneath the blush of sunrise. For so long, this skyline had symbolized distance, division, worlds she could never cross. Now it looked different. She felt his arms wrap around her waist, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. She allowed herself to believe in a future for the first time, not without obstacles and battles, but together. And sometimes, that was all two hearts needed. If you've journeyed with Nicholas and Natalia through every heartbreak, doubt, and triumph, let this moment remind you how love can rise even in the face of the harshest storms. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. Leave a like to support and follow the channel so you don't miss the next chapter, because their story is far from over.